So where we've gotten here, then, at least with regard to the compatibilism, is God has decrees, He's determined, and yet we are free, but our free choices are based on our desires, right? Kind of who we are, the new tree, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So basically, freedom, as compatibilism defines it, is that we always act in accordance with our strongest desires. So whatever the strongest desire at the moment of choosing, from the human perspective, that is, that determines what choice you're going to make. You are going to make that choice. And so there, and of course there's a whole set of things that influence what those desires might be. There might be certain circumstances in your particular situation. There might be certain internal inclinations that you have, certain personality traits. There can be a whole host of different factors that come into play. But when all that stew, all the ingredients in that stew is mixed together, out will emerge a certain set of desires, but the kinds of ingredients that are thrown into that stew are always going to be determined by the basic nature of the person himself.
Yeah.
So that
So,
if we have this basic nature that is corrupted, then all the ingredients that go into that stew are going to be affected by that corrupted nature. If we have a regenerated nature, as the Bible speaks about the process of regeneration, then
right.
that's going to create a new set of desires that are not corrupted, and affect the kinds of choices that person is going to make.
Okay. So what I'm guessing then is that in terms of God's decrees and how He operates, my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're not saying that He arranges the circumstances so that our desires uh, match what He wants us to do, but maybe He puts the desires there, or maybe a little of both, or what? What do you think here?
Yeah. No, I do believe that God determines circumstances, and that He sets forth the conditions by which somebody will make those choices. But what we need to understand is that God rarely ever accomplishes things apart from means.
Hmm.
And so this is what theologians would call primary causation and secondary causation. Okay, so that God is the primary cause of what happens in the universe, but He doesn't just directly cause things to happen. Generally speaking, He uses means, He uses instruments. For example, you could read, if you carefully read in Isaiah chapter 10, he talks about the Assyrian king and how he is, you are my instrument of
Hmm.
judgment to this evil nation called Israel and Judah. And you're like an axe, you're like a hammer that I use to wield in my hand to wield judgment. And yet we see in that same passage, it says, after I've got done using you to wield my purposes of judgment, then I am going to judge you
Judge.
for
Yeah.
in your own heart having evil desires
Hmm.
by which you did this. And so it's an interesting passage because it shows that God had a purpose in using the Assyrians and the Assyrian king to accomplish his purposes, which was judgment. And yet in their hearts, they didn't intend the same thing that God intended by using them. In their own hearts, they intended evil. God intended good. God's good purposes were judgment. Their purposes is that we want to be despots and walk around the countryside and wipe out these nations because we're power hungry, evil warlords. And so that was their motivation, and that proceeded from the depravity of their hearts. Whereas God could determine the same exact event, the same exact decisions that they made, and yet God would have good purposes for those things. And so compatibilism basically says there's a dual explanation for everything that happens in the world. There's a dual explanation for every choice that we make. God is the primary cause of those things, and we are the secondary causes of those things. A second way of looking at that is that God is the remote cause of those things, whereas we are the proximate or immediate cause of those things. So when we think about our choices, we're not first and foremost thinking, oh, yeah, God caused me to do this. No, we are thinking of our own particular desires, our own particular reasons for the choices that we make. And so we really don't necessarily see the hand of God in the choices that we make, but that doesn't mean that he's not present in what's
Right.
going on. You see that, for example, in the life of Job. When you look at Job chapters 1 and 2, you see two planes. You see the plane, the heavenly plane, where you have this conversation between God and Satan, where God has determined, hey, I want you to go test this man, this righteous man called Job. Go do this to him, but don't do this. And so he determines what is going to happen to Job. Well, does Job have any idea of what this conversation is? No, it's
Mm,
invisible to him. All he knows is that his children have been killed. All he knows is that he's got some strange skin disease, that has come upon him, and he's wondering what in the world happened, and so he doesn't see that there is a sovereign God in the heavens that have determined certain things that are going to happen in his life. He can't see that. All he sees is the earthly plane. He sees what's happening in terms of decisions and choices that people have made, and doesn't realize that behind all that stands a sovereign God.
mm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.